1 year ago, life in Colorado changed. Confirmed case of COVID, flurry of questions, conflicting answers, and before long, the lockdown. Tonight, we remember how far we've come and we look to the road ahead in a special hour-long edition of Next, with live coverage of the state's Remembrance Ceremony for the nearly 6,000 Coloradans lost and an address by the governor. More than 1,000 vaccine appointments had to be canceled after the wrong people crashed the system. We got our hands on plans for fans at Coors Field, and they're going to make you watch the Rockies. I mean, like, actually watch the game instead of just going to that great ballpark. That's tonight on Next. A year ago tonight, we knew, but we didn't. And we knew that COVID-19 was finally here, the first confirmed case. But if we told you that 1 year later, to the day, the governor would be again extending his mask mandate, I bet the reaction would have been masks? Government mandate? I mean, imagine if a year ago tonight we'd said the word vaccine. That's the magic word today for people 60 and older, along with people with certain medical conditions and grocery workers and people in agriculture. All of them are now, today, eligible for the shot. As we've said so much lately, it's been a year. Colorado is tremendously average in comparison to other states in getting people vaccinated. About 17% of the population has one dose so far. More than half of those people are fully immunized. As ag workers became vaccine eligible today, thousands of employees at JBS and Cargill were vaccinated. Both those meat processing plants held vaccine clinics today. The outbreak at the JBS Greeley plant made national news. 6 employees died and nearly 500 of them contracted the virus. Like students getting a hold of the answers to the quiz ahead of time, somebody figured out their way into the vaccine scheduling system and started passing out appointments to people who are not eligible. Now about 1,100 appointments have been canceled. Let's bring in Anusha Roy to talk about how this happened.
Yeah, Kyle, it's all being linked back to one link for registration. So this is through COVID Check Colorado. This is a philanthropic organization that's helping with the vaccine rollout. And they've been working with a whole bunch of hospitals. And part of this is sending out these personalized registration links to eligible patients when it's their turn to get a vaccine appointment. That link is where something went very wrong. So it was yesterday that they started noticing that there was this huge uptick in the number of people being scheduled. And when they took a closer look at it, they realized that a whole bunch of people who were not eligible yet had gotten in and started scheduling appointments. So in all, they ended up canceling 1,135 appointments yesterday. This is going to be for people who disclosed their age but were too young to get a vaccine at that point, or who hadn't disclosed other current eligibility criteria. So how does this happen? Well, COVID Check Colorado is still looking into it, but they did confirm that the problem was linked to one specified registration link. And in a note that was sent out to the roughly 1,100 people we're talking about, they said, unfortunately, someone had misused that link. And if you are wondering, well, how does this all get connected back to one link? Well, that is the part that is still being investigated. So unfortunately, we don't quite have the answers to that yet, but we'll definitely follow up on it. Kyle, they did say that for those who were properly eligible at the time for their vaccine appointments, those vaccine appointments were kept. They didn't have to cancel or reschedule those.
And for the folks that had the canceled appointments, Nusha?
Yeah, so they essentially got a note saying, hey, we're going to move you back to the pre-registration list. And they were asked to fill out the pre-screening questions so that when it was actually their time, based off of the state phases, to get an appointment, they would get another invitation at that point.
We knew people were trying to game the system. That's the first time that we know of that's been done on a mass scale. Anusha, thank you. There are currently 311 people hospitalized in our state with COVID-19, basically unchanged from yesterday. It's down 3 patients. This time last week, we had 356 patients being treated for the virus. Definite slowing in the reduction in hospitalizations. Positivity rate has remained in a good spot and steady for a few days. 3.2% yesterday, 3.4% in a weekly average. In virtually all workplaces, this one included, you cannot refuse to wear a mask and just pop your droplets all over your coworkers. But the Colorado legislature is not like other workplaces. So some Republican legislators there are free to mock and ignore the mask requirements that apply at your workplace and mine. Even when Capitol co-workers like Democratic Senator Julie Gonzalez, who's lost 3 family members to COVID, pleads with her co-workers for just a bit of compassion and decency rather than just turning everything into politics.
It broke my heart that I have colleagues in this building who refuse to this day to wear masks, leading thousands of people across our state into denial. Somehow, even in the most straightforward of circumstances, with the clearest of opportunities to come together and to do right, we have colleagues in this building who've chosen to prop up conspiracy theories and to cast doubt on life-saving recommendations for our public health. Y'all, that makes me furious.
Tonight, Colorado will pause to remember the nearly 6,000 of our neighbors lost to COVID in the last year. We are going to stay with you here until 7 o'clock tonight for live coverage of a Remembrance Ceremony, as well as an address to the state by Democratic Governor Polis. That's scheduled to begin at 6:30. Well, we checked, and the Rockies still plan to play baseball without Nolan Arenado this year. And you can watch at Coors Field if you want to do that. Come on, who am I kidding about? That place is going to be packed with people who are coming to cheer for the visiting teams. Coors Field is actually going to make it harder to do what so many people like to do. They go to that beautiful ballpark and they don't really watch the baseball game. Here's Marshall Zellner.
No dinger appearances. Depending on your thoughts on this mascot, that may be the best or worst news, since learning Nolan Arenado also won't be at Coors Field. We asked the state health department for the Rockies' plan for fans and received this 6-page bullet point list. The team will be allowed 12,536 fans for the first 7 games against the Dodgers and Diamondbacks. After that, it's to be determined. So for the 11,000 Dodger fans at the home opener, here's what you'll experience. You cannot bring your own food into the stadium. Want to party at the rooftop? Nope. No standing room only rooftop tickets will be sold, and access to the rooftop drink rails won't be allowed. Beer here? Nope. No vendors in the stands. So you'll have to get your chocolate-covered strawberry fix elsewhere. Beer will be sold packaged. I think that means bottles or cans, no drafts. And pop will be sold also packaged or in cups with straws or lids. By the way, the team's plan called Pop Soda. Come on, we've been St. Louis enough. Back to the plan. Players are discouraged from throwing balls into the crowd, and no autographs or photos with players. Basically, you're expected to actually, show up to watch the Rockies. Well, tickets will be sold primarily to season ticket holders, so maybe there'll be more Rockies fans than we think. I asked the team which row will be the closest to the field someone can sit. I haven't heard back yet. Each section will act as a pod. Under 25% capacity, there will be no more than 78 people per section. And so as not to distract you from ignoring the product on the field, music, video, and public announcement volume will be at, quote, an appropriate level to allow guests to have normal conversations.
Because that's why you go to baseball games, just to talk, apparently. Here's some other nuggets I learned. Tickets will be sold in groups of 2, 3, or 4. I've asked the Rockies also what happens if you want to go by yourself, because you're not allowed to buy less than the group. That's one of the questions that the Rockies promised they will get back to me on. And because I think it's important to know for people who can't sit in the lower seats, 3.6%, which equals about 450, will be ADA tickets, Kyle.
It's good that they're thinking this all through, Marshall, but just trying to picture just like a couple people kind of like, sprinkled about through the stands. And it is, as my toddler likes to say, a sad.
The details of who will be allowed in, where they'll be sitting, I'm still going through. But like I said, 78 people. As it grows, each pod, each section at max, I think, is 281 is what it said. So just picture 78 sprinkled through. And I want to point out, I keep some memorabilia throughout my office here, and I haven't opened my helmet standings board. And I kind of don't want to, because the Rockies are still in the second place position, and I just want to hold that. And for Kevin, our producer, the Cubs are first in the Central.
Oh, he'll love that. You might just not get that out for the year. Honestly, the thing that kills me is that you can't stand at the rail on the party deck with a beer in your hand, because those are my absolute favorite baseball fans, because they're normally looking at the sunset or something else, and then there will be a cheer and all of them yell in unison, "What happened?" That's my favorite way to see a baseball game, the "What happened" crowd. Thank you, Marshall. I'll give the State Unemployment Benefits Office this, all right? They are looking everywhere they can these days for help, even from Senator Cory Gardner. But wait, you say. Oh, yes. CDLE Executive Director Joe Barella sent a letter to Congress on Tuesday asking for a quick extension of pandemic-related benefit programs. Asked this of all of Colorado's lawmakers, including Senator Michael Bennet and Senator Cory Gardner, who lost in November and has been replaced by Senator John Hickenlooper. I get it. This is like a very small little deal. And the unemployment office they are up to their backsides right now. Let's look at this optimistically, though. If Cory Gardner got the state's letter and has some free time, maybe he can help out the Colorado Unemployment Office. Cory can come down and answer some calls or something. I sat down today to write something about this March 5th milestone. 1 year since the first confirmed COVID case in Colorado. And I'll be honest, words failed me, so I decided to procrastinate by opening up some mail you sent. And there's a note in there from Amanda Blankenship. She's the young woman with Down syndrome who asked a question of the governor at our vaccine town hall. And it was Amanda who offered the words that I couldn't find today. Things will work out. That's what she sent me. Yes, they will. I think that we're all more optimistic about that now than ever. Things will work out. Doesn't erase the hardship or the loss, but things will work out. And I love the image of the open bird cage and the bird singing in the flowers, because all of us have felt like the caged bird at some point in the last year. Amanda also included this letter with the line, "Be kind is what we can all do." That too has been the story of the last year. Countless acts of kindness between neighbors and total strangers. I love that Amanda's note reminds us that being kind is what we all can do. It's not all that we could do. But in a year that's challenged each of us in different ways, being kind, that is still the thing we all can do.
Mental health prior to this has always been a very taboo topic, but now they want to make it an open conversation.
Let's have that conversation about our veterans and the growing number taking their own lives. There's a unique program in northern Colorado that starts early to protect those who serve. Next. Epic Experience is the latest small nonprofit in Colorado that is being built up through your generosity. They're based out of Arvada, and they offer free week-long outdoor adventure camps for cancer survivors to help those Coloradans redefine what they see as possible in their lives and to connect them with this automatic support system of fellow survivors. You have raised $32,000 for Epic Experience since Wednesday. They are immensely grateful because they have 8 times as many applications as they have open spots. So your donations are going to help them expand those camps to more Coloradans who have survived cancer. If you want to get in on this week's goodness, you know the drill. Text thanks to 303-871-1491. I'll send you the link to join me and a bunch of next viewers in helping this small nonprofit do more to serve Coloradans who have survived cancer. They are the future leaders of the United States military, and one challenge they will face is well known: protecting the mental health of those who serve and who have served. The VA says about 20 veterans die by suicide every day in this country. It's a problem that's getting worse, not better. In Colorado, the veteran suicide rate is higher than the national average. That is where Marshall Spring and Carly Rayberg come in. They're trying to prevent veteran suicides by starting early with cadets.
The active duty military members and veterans have among the highest rates of suicide.
We only know that the number is increasing and increasing rapidly.
My name is Marshall Spring, and I started a project about a year ago training ROTC students in suicide prevention with the intention of reducing suicide amongst military members and veterans.
My name is Carly Rayberg. I work for the Alliance for Suicide Prevention of Larimer County in their Veterans Outreach Department as the ROTC liaison.
So ROTC students are the future leadership of the United States military. So this is a fantastic opportunity to affect the subject of suicide from a leadership point of view.
It's a very unique program. I don't believe it's ever been done before.
We're training these ROTC cadets in a curriculum called Question, Persuade, Refer, QPR.
Just like CPR, except for suicide prevention. We're getting these college-age students who still want to make a difference. These are future military members where mental health prior to this has always been a very taboo topic, but now they want to make it an open conversation. So this new generation of active duty military might actually be able to change the face of that, and they're excited about it.
The goal here is to reduce suicide in one of our most vulnerable populations.
So knowing that the numbers are higher for this population of people is both terrifying but driving. It's terrifying because I would never want to lose someone close to me, but it's also driving to me because I know I can do something about it, and now I have an outlet to do so.
The best news on a bad day is your good news tonight. And when we all have to get booster shots in a year or two, do you have to get the same one as your original vaccine? Or are you free to mix and match like a delicious immunity cocktail? Grab a drink. Meet us back here in a minute for next. Tonight's next question comes from Anna. She's looking ahead years down the line when we have to get booster shots for COVID and wondering if you have to stick with the same brand. You know, if you get a Pfizer this year, does that mean you have to get a Pfizer booster next year? Or can you mix and match? Anna, that's a fantastic question because researchers are still trying to answer it themselves. We asked Dr. Michelle Barron with UC Health, and she said that the recommendation is that this first year's vaccines be from the same manufacturer. We've talked about that. You get your first dose and your second dose from the same folks. It has not yet been determined by the scientific community whether you're going to be advised to stick with the same vaccine for your boosters. Dr. Barron told us she suspects that in the future you will not be limited to the brand of vaccine you initially received, but there's ongoing research on this. Your good news this Friday is a reminder of something that we have talked about a couple of times on Next, that for all of 2020's miseries, their families are going to look back on that year, at least parts of it, with great joy. March 5th, 2020 is the day that Colorado confirmed its first case. Debbie Gruffy wrote in to say it's also the day that will always be a happy one in her heart and house because the birth of her first grandchild. So happy birthday, Caden. Whole lot of people are going to tell you about your birth year for the rest of your life. I hope some folks have some good things to say.
Finally Friday, beautiful sunshine and snow? What snow? And you're not going to see any snow this weekend. Temperatures, which were warm today in the mid-50s, are headed into the 60s and 70s over the next few days. High pressure will keep the storm track to the north. We've got a storm in the Pacific Northwest and yesterday's storm well to the south and east. So tonight, enjoy fair skies and 30 degrees. Tomorrow, temperatures way above average in the mid-60s. We'll do it again on Sunday. We'll see 70s early next week. The next storm and chance for precipitation arrives the middle of the week. Wednesday into Thursday, temperatures will be cooler, and we've got a chance of rain and snow.
The most Colorado thing we saw today is people pretending it's summer like the minute the temperature hits 60. You got Gary, who's catching a tan in his backyard. We're told Gary usually goes to Arizona for the winter, but opted for the sunshine in Thornton instead. If you're saying, wait, who's creeping on Gary taking pictures of him shirtless in the backyard? Don't worry, it's copacetic. His neighbor Wendy took and shared this photo with us with Gary's permission. He's kind of proud of his routine. Nothing creepy going on there. And then there's our viewer Megan's kids in Winders. Pool's not open, but yeah, I mean, kids, if you want to throw on the swimsuits to sled on the bare pavement, you do you, kids. It's easier than arguing with them. You know what I mean? If that's what they want to do, that's what they can do. Send us the most Colorado things you see. It's good to smile every now and then, you know what I'm saying? When we return, we are going to turn to coverage of the state of Colorado's Remembrance Ceremony tonight. Look forward, 1 year after our state's first confirmed case of COVID. Steve Steger, Dr. Pyle Coley will join me for that next. Think back, do you remember where you were a year ago today when you heard the news? I mean, we knew that it was inevitable. COVID-19 was floating around in Colorado. We're just waiting for confirmation of the first official case. Think about how little we knew then compared to now. I mean, at the beginning, we just like fixated on each case, you know, like, well, if that one person had not come to Colorado, then maybe we would be fine, you know? And then all the time that we spent scrubbing surfaces for months and months until it was pretty clear that the real threat from COVID was the droplets from the people around us. But most importantly, as we think back, Think about all of the neighbors and friends and family members lost in the last year. Almost 6,000 Coloradans in total. In a moment, state leaders will begin a remembrance ceremony outside of the state capitol. We will take you there for every moment of that. The building lit up in magenta tonight. A number of prominent buildings around town are lit in that color in a show of remembrance and solidarity with Coloradans. Well, the state capitol, city and county building, McNichols building there across Civic Center Park, the Denver Performing Arts Center, even Red Rocks tonight is lit up in magenta lights. I'm joined for the next half hour by my colleagues Steve Stager and Dr. Pyle Coley, who have been covering the pandemic with us since day one. On day one, we were side by side here discussing news of that first confirmed case. Of course, like so many things, that's changed in the last year. Steve and Dr. Coley join us from home tonight. We're going to take a look at our COVID-19 numbers from the start of the pandemic to today, start to finish. Our COVID-19 hospitalizations are getting back down to the floor that we saw in the summertime. We're not there yet. The stress on the hospital system now is greater than it was over the summer, but you can see the three distinct peaks. First one in April, a much smaller peak in July, and then the worst surge in November and December. Today's hospitalizations are a sixth of what the hospitals were dealing with during that early winter peak. The weekly positivity rate of tests coming back positive has been dropping in an encouraging way for more than a month now. It's not quite at our summer lows, but much better than the spike in the winter. You see how the testing capacity has built out since the beginning of the pandemic. We went from a couple thousand tests a day to 30 to 40,000 tests per day now. In the first few months of the pandemic, we were averaging around 300 new cases a day. You can see how those numbers soared in October. At the peak in November, we were averaging more than 5,000 cases a day. On Tuesday, our weekly average of new cases per day dropped below 1,000 cases for the first time since early October, which is great progress. So I mentioned we've lost nearly 6,000 Coloradans to COVID-19 in the last year. This chart shows the weekly average of deaths among people who had COVID. During the surge at the end of last year, we were losing about 65 Coloradans a week. You know, Dr. Coley, I think one thing that's happened over the last year is that a lot of people got a crash course in public health. You know, it's not something that a lot of people are familiar with, and I think we've come to understand how public health guidance changes as we learn about emerging threats. A year ago, you and I were sitting right here in this studio side by side when the governor said this about the first confirmed COVID patient in Colorado.
He was asymptomatic at the time. That means when he traveled at the airport, when he was on the airplane, he was asymptomatic, which means there is a low risk of transmission, non-contagious when you're asymptomatic generally, and that's according to the latest information from the CDC. Therefore, there's no reason at this time to believe that other travelers were exposed per current CDC guidance.
Dr. Coley, I remember you almost jumped out of your chair and you were saying, no, you can't be saying that people are not contagious when they're asymptomatic. But again, the information was changing on us so quickly. The next day, the governor came out and said, hey, we've got some new information. And it just feels like it's been a fire hose of changes and guidance since then.
That's exactly right, Kyle. And you know, as you said, I remember exactly where I was sitting, what I was wearing when we had this discussion just a year ago. And a year ago, we were standing with an opponent we didn't know, without any weapons in our armamentarium, and really not knowing what to expect with this war. And I'm happy to say that we, you know, as a community, as Coloradans, and as a country, a year later have made tremendous progress because we've all come together. We now know about prevention, we know about testing, we've got 3 vaccines that are highly efficacious, and we've done a great job with treatments and, you know, with reducing the case fatality rate. So as you said, it's been a journey. We've been learning together, but I feel like everything I learned into medical school was crammed into the last year, and all of us have been on this journey together.
Yeah, as you look back, I mean, we couldn't have imagined losing as many Americans as we did, but if somebody said at the beginning, oh, you're going to have these therapeutics, you're going to have vaccines by this date, that's something that people would have really reached for. Dr. Coley, stand by. Steve Stager's covered and questioned the state's decision-making as we've gone along. Steve, Governor Polis has had immense emergency powers over the last year, and they've really shown Colorado and the nation both his strengths and weaknesses as a leader.
Yeah, you know, you talk about strengths. And when you talk about strengths of the governor's leadership, I always think of the early days of the pandemic. The decision to close down ski resorts. I remember sitting in the newsroom that day and thinking, wow, to me, that was the moment that this kicked in of what it really was, that life was about to change quite a bit. But through those first few months, the governor was doing a lot of things that may on the public face have not been popular at the time, but I think they proved to be good things for us in the end. If you look at those numbers, the graph you just showed, the dip in the summer, that was attributed mostly a lot to some of the decisions that we made in the spring to get people to kind of be aware of what's going on. We'll talk about the weaknesses in just a little bit.
All right, Steve, thank you. Stand by as well. So this is the scene outside the state capitol tonight, where the state is hosting a remembrance ceremony for the nearly 6,000 Coloradans lost to COVID in the last year. Sounds the Colorado Symphony playing tonight. There will also be a rendition of Amazing Grace by the performing artist Mary Louise Lee of Denver, wife of Mayor Hancock. We saw the governor and his partner, now fiancé, Marlon Reese, being escorted in just a moment ago. The governor announcing their engagement after many, many years together earlier this week. Both the governor and the first gentleman had bouts with COVID. The first gentleman was even hospitalized for a time due to breathing difficulties. One of the 24,000 Coloradans to be hospitalized with COVID-19. As we reflect on the last year and we think about those two battles that the state had, both early on and then in the early winter. You look at the number of cases, how many more cases there were in early winter compared to the beginning, but how many more of the deaths were in the early period as our state grappled with the virus. This is Pastor Josh Kingery of Red Rocks Church.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us. Tonight, on the one-year anniversary of the first confirmed COVID-19 case in our state, we come together as Coloradans to remember and honor nearly 6,000 souls that we've lost. We want to take a moment to recognize all of the families who have tragically lost loved ones. We can't begin to imagine the pain and the heartache that you have endured. But tonight, please know that you do not mourn alone. We are with you, and God is with you. Psalm 23, 1-4 reminds us, "The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me." Would you join me in a moment of prayer? God, even in the most difficult of times, we know that you are with us, leading us beside quiet waters. And when we go through the darkest of times, we don't have to give in to fear, but we can have hope. We ask that you grant us an unshakable peace to each and every person who has lost a loved one. Amen. At the onset of the COVID pandemic, Governor Polis went out of his way to reach out to the faith leaders from around the state. He and his team hosted monthly calls with 800 plus clergy members. And that communication bridge has been invaluable for all of us who are leading congregations and doing our best to serve our communities. Governor Polis, on behalf of my peers, I want to say thank you so much for the ways that you have led throughout this difficult season. Would you please join me in welcoming Governor Jared Polis?
Good evening, Colorado. It was exactly 365 days ago today when I shared with you that our state had our very first confirmed COVID-19 case. Tragically, just 8 days later, I sadly reported from Colorado Springs our state's first death from COVID-19. On that day, none of us could have known what was to come or what the next 12 months would entail. We didn't know it would last this long, that for so many of us, it would be so long before we could have a safe visit to see grandma and grandpa, our aunts and uncles. We didn't know that parents would have to juggle their children's online learning with their own job. We didn't yet know that a normal get-together like a birthday party or wedding could be so dangerous. We simply couldn't have imagined, we never imagined, not just how drastically our lives would change this last year, but also how many Coloradans would be forced to contract and fight this deadly virus, and ultimately how many would lose that battle. And today we spend in their memory. I can still remember exactly how it felt for me to learn and for you to learn that we lost our first Coloradan. You know, when you elected me to serve as your governor, I knew that it would be my sacred responsibility to lead this state through its great challenges. There's some things that to a certain extent you contemplate as challenges, wildfires, floods, but no leader, I don't think any of us can ever be fully prepared for the news of the last year. A once-in-a-generation pandemic took the life of the very first Coloradan just less than a year ago, and that there would be much more loss to come. You know, we knew the day of the first loss would come when we saw in the news the virus spreading across the world. It could be a matter of days, it could be a matter of weeks, but knowing that it was heading here did not lessen the heartache or the loss. It's a very somber drive for me to Colorado Springs, and all I could think about was her life, her family, her friends, her loved ones, and the immense grief that they now carry, that so many Coloradans now carry. Since that day, 1 year ago, we've lost 5,984 souls in Colorado to COVID-19. And in nearly every case, instead of being surrounded by family and loved ones, they had to spend their last moments alone in a hospital bed, family members unable to be there with them in their final days. With the sole saving grace of modern technology and the ability to video conference or phone. Of course, as humans, since the day we were born, we know that we don't have endless time here on earth. We all know that one day our time will come, as Genesis 3:19 states, "For dust you are, and to dust you shall return." None of us can say when our time will come, what it will look like, but we all hope, every one of us, that it comes after a long life well lived, not surrounded by strangers, not taken by a deadly novel virus, and most certainly not before our time. This has been a year of great loss. With each loss, the pain doesn't diminish, it compounds. These aren't just numbers that are collected and entered in a database or shown on a dashboard or a map. Every number has a story. Every number has a name, a person, people that are left behind. These are nearly 6,000 of our grandmothers and grandfathers, our moms and dads, our brothers and sisters, our aunts and uncles, and yes, in some cases, our sons and daughters. There are neighbors from down the street, next door, the friendly cashier at the local grocery store, the doting husband and father, the veteran who served America overseas only to lose the final battle to an invisible enemy, the maintenance worker in our kids' school, your friends and family, and my own friends, Rachel, Corky, and Nino. They are you, and they are me. They are our fellow Coloradans. I know that at times the grief, the loss has felt unbearable this last year, too heavy a load for us to carry on our own. And it's not only the loss of loved ones that we grieve. In many ways, we grieve a lost innocence, Because over the last year, Coloradans, Americans, the entire world has experienced grief and loss in so many shapes and sizes and ways. For some, it's the loss of a job, supported your family, helped send your kids to college, or filled your days with purpose. The loss of opportunities that we were all forced to give up so we could stay home to care for our children or a loved one. It's a loss in many ways of life as we knew it, of the certainty we took for granted in our everyday lives and who we were before this horrific pandemic struck. Each of us has lived a different experience over this last year, but every one of us has reason to mourn. With all change comes loss. With all loss comes grief. But out of our pain, out of our sacrifice, out of our suffering, we've summoned a great internal reservoir of strength and resilience that lives deep in our DNA as Coloradans. Time and time again, we've proven that no matter how often we're knocked down, we keep getting up. We don't quit because we're Coloradans. Throughout our history, Colorado has always shown incredible grit and determination and generosity in the face of hardship, and this last year has been no different. And I've been inspired to see it manifest in so many different ways across our great state. The nurse who shows up to shift after shift, dedicating more time to her patients than her own family, sleeping in a separate room in her own home. Our educators who spent countless hours working to balance online classrooms while getting back to working with students in person to ensure that our children's education is not yet another casualty of this pandemic. The business owners who innovated and adapted to ensure that their staff and customers are safe. The volunteers who spend each weekend administering the life-saving vaccine in clinics across this state. There's nothing we wouldn't do for one another. Shovel an elderly neighbor's sidewalk after a snowstorm. Go out of our way to help families fleeing wildfires or floods. Chip in a few bucks for charity or at a Sunday, ordering takeout from our neighborhood restaurant during a tough time. It's just who we are. Amidst this love and kindness, there's no question that the very foundation of all of our lives has been shaken by this experience. And I know that sometimes it can feel like just getting through another day can be a victory. It's been a year, Colorado. It's been a hard year. And no one's emerged unscathed. We've all felt that pain and made sacrifice. It would be easier to numb ourselves to this pain, to the daily tragedies that the pandemic has inflicted on us, to pretend that it isn't happening. But to do that would only be an immense disservice to those that we lost, whose lives we celebrate today. In order to honor them, we remember each and every one of our 5,984 Coloradans, over 500,000 Americans, millions across the world. And we do everything in our power to take care of the people that are still here and still with us, that we treasure and cherish. As survivors, it's our responsibility to wake up every day and live our own lives as best we can. Because a year after this pandemic came to Colorado, nearly 6,000 Coloradans have died from COVID-19, and they have no days left. And we live our days in their memory and in celebration of their lives. Let them be our inspiration in these dark times as the sun gets ready to rise once again on a hopeful new day. And there are reasons to be hopeful. With each day, we get closer to the end of this nightmare. Modern science has triumphed over the virus and handed us not one, not two, but 3 safe and highly effective tools to prevent further loss. And I'm proud to report that the life-saving vaccine is making its way into arms across the state of Colorado. And let me assure you that I won't rest until every person who wants a vaccine gets one. I'm speaking to you today from the west steps of our state capitol, which tonight is lit up in magenta-colored lights. Magenta symbolizes universal love and compassion, support, kindness, things we can all use more of, things that will carry Colorado through this crisis. In the coming weeks and months, I'm confident that there will be much more to celebrate. But tonight, let us take a moment to honor our own sacrifices and sit with the memory of those who are no longer with us. Now, I'd like to ask everyone at home to join me in a moment of reflection as we remember and honor all those that we've lost in the last year. Please join me in welcoming performing artist Mary Louise Lee, who will lead our moment of reflection with the soulful song of renewal, accompanied by members of the Colorado Symphony, Amazing Grace.
was grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear the hour I first
Thank you, Mary Louise and the Colorado Symphony, for that beautiful moment of reflection on what we've lost and will never regain, and the renewal that lies in each and every one of us. Thank you all for joining us tonight. There are brighter days ahead, but today is a time for us to reflect on where we've been and who we've lost. As we continue on the path towards a bright new future, I urge every Coloradan to protect yourselves and your loved ones. We cherish each and every day of precious life, and we need to continue showing our love for one another in these final months of the pandemic by being careful. So please don't just do it because I'm urging you to. Do it because you love your family and your friends. Do it for those we've lost. Do it for the future of our state. Wear a mask. Remain a safe distance from others whenever you can. Limit your social interactions. And please, when it's your turn, get the life-saving vaccine. My fellow Coloradans, we know how this past year began. We know how it's gone. But how we build back depends on the actions that we take in the weeks and the months ahead. All of us working together across our entire state. And I have no doubt that we're up for the challenges of the future. We're almost there. God bless you, God bless Colorado, and God bless America.
We're almost there. Closing words from Colorado Governor Jared Polis as he concludes tonight's evening of remembrance on the west steps of the state capitol. A small in-person audience there tonight to see that ceremony, which was carried live on every television station in town. A remembrance of the nearly 6,000 Coloradans lost over the last year to COVID-19. It was 1 year ago today that Colorado had its first 2 confirmed cases. Somebody who'd come to the state to go skiing in Summit County, and an older woman who had gone on an international trip and returned to Douglas County. I want to bring back my colleagues Steve Steger and Dr. Pyle Coley to talk about some of what we've learned in the last year, but also to take a look ahead. A hopeful message from the governor. We've heard this from him before. This has been his role to exhort Coloradans to follow the best guidance and look to the future. So in closing tonight, I want to ask each of you, Steve first, based on what we've seen over the last year, what is your hope for Colorado moving forward?
I think certainly the first is that things start to return to some semblance of normal soon. But I think if we sit and reflect about some of the positive things that have happened in the midst of this awful time in our memories, the volunteers making vaccine appointments for people, just helping out other people in the neighborhood, maybe to buy groceries if they weren't able to go to the store. I hope a lot of that sticks around. And I hope that we can carry that forward as we move on from this horrible time in our lives.
Dr. Coley, your hope for the future? Dr. Coley, your hope for the future?
You know, Kyle, despite how hard the last year has been, I have to say I echo what the governor is saying. I'm feeling incredibly hopeful about the future. As an individual and as a Coloradan, I'm feeling hopeful about the fact that my community, my friends, my family members are going to be able to get vaccinated. We're going to get herd immunity, and we're going to get our lives back to normal. As a state, I think we've done a nice job of really leading the charge, setting an example for other states, following those mask mandates, you know, really getting those vaccines into people's arms as quickly as possible. And as a scientific community, I think I'm really hopeful that this has taught us how to develop treatments, vaccines, and to really improve technology at a rapid pace. So I think it has been a really valuable year with a lot of valuable lessons.
Holy, thank you. Steve Steger, thank you as well. Next viewer sent me a pin very early on in this that I keep with me today that just says, what we do matters. And I think that all of us have learned that lesson over the last year. Our choices, for good or for ill, truly do matter. With appreciation for all the healthcare workers who have both cared for patients and are now taking care of the vaccines, and with condolences to every Coloradan who suffered loss.